Administrative Coordinator ZEF9 had processed deportations to 17 different penal worlds, but none quite like this. The holographic display floating above his workstation showed Kepler 442c in all its murderous glory. A swirling mass of storms that could dissolve titanium, forests that literally ate anything with a pulse, and weather patterns that shifted between Arctic freeze and volcanic hellscape without warning. Beautiful, in a way that made sensible beings want to vomit. "You're certain this isn't excessive?" The question came from his assistant, a nervous Quillen whose fur kept shifting colors with anxiety. "I mean, these are humans we're discussing. They barely qualify as sentient by most metrics." ZEF9's tentacles rippled with amusement. Barely sentient beings who managed to hijack 3 hegemony vessels, establish unauthorized colonies on 6 restricted worlds, and somehow convince the Merchant Guild to declare them a protected trading species, despite having no formal government structure. Point taken. The Quillen's fur settled into a queasy orange. But Class 0 designation means certain death within standard solar cycles, even for adaptive species. Precisely the point, KEF-F2. ZEF-F9 pulled up the atmospheric readings with a flourish. Sulfuric acid precipitation, carnivorous vegetation with documented kill rates of 97%, predatory fauna that hunt in coordinated packs, temperature variations that would liquefy most carbon-based life. He paused, savoring the moment. And that's just the surface conditions. Through the reinforced viewports of the orbital platform, the transport convoy looked almost pathetic. 12 cargo haulers loaded with 50,000 humans, drifting toward their new home, like seeds blown into a furnace. ZEF9 had watched similar deployments before. The screaming usually started when the atmospheric readings became visible to the deportees. "Sir?" KEF-2's voice cracked slightly. "The humans are singing." Indeed they were. The audio pickups from Transport 7 carried what could only be described as musical harmony across the comm channels. Not prayers, not lamentations, not even the usual threats and bargaining attempts. Just music. Probably some primitive ritual to appease whatever deities they worship, ZEF9 muttered, though something about the melody nagged at him. It sounded almost celebratory. The platform's communications officer, a crystalline Vorth whose species communicated through light patterns, flashed urgent yellow. "Coordinator, I'm receiving multiple transmissions from the convoy. The humans are requesting surface deployment schedules and equipment manifests." Equipment manifests? They appear to be cataloging available tools and materials for what they term initial habitat establishment. Several are asking about the local ecosystem's nutritional profiles. ZEF9's primary eye stalk swiveled to focus on the display. In his experience, doomed species spent their final moments in denial, rage, or desperate bargaining. They didn't typically inquire about meal planning. "Perhaps their primitive brains haven't processed the reality of their situation," suggested KEF-2, though his fur had shifted to a skeptical purple. "Transport Commander Val-7 to Platform Control," crackled the comm. "We have a situation developing. The humans have requested permission to modify their landing schedule. They want to deploy in smaller groups across multiple biomes instead of single-site containment." "Absolutely not," ZEF9 snapped. "Standard deportation protocol requires centralized deployment for maximum efficiency." "Sir?" "They've presented a detailed analysis of local weather patterns and suggested optimal landing coordinates to avoid the worst storm systems. They've also identified what they claim are promising water sources and potential shelter locations." The silence that followed could have powered a small starship. ZEF9 felt his career flashing before his optical sensors. In 3 decades of deportation administration, no condemned species had ever attempted to optimize their own exile. Commander, are you telling me that the humans have somehow acquired and analyzed environmental data for a restricted Class 0 world? Negative, sir. They appear to be making these assessments by looking out the viewports. Keftu's fur had gone completely white. That's impossible. The atmospheric interference alone should prevent any meaningful visual analysis. They've also formed what they call working groups, continued the transport commander. Agriculture, construction, defense, and something called wildlife management. One group is apparently excited about the unique biodiversity opportunities. Zeph-9 stared at the displays showing Kepler 442c's acid-soaked surface, where the very air could strip flesh from bone, and the plants literally consumed anything that moved. The humans were treating their death sentence like some sort of colonial expedition. Sir, the communications officer's light patterns had shifted to confused amber. Transport 12 is reporting that humans have begun teaching each other songs. They say it's for morale maintenance during atmospheric entry. Morale maintenance. Zeph-9 repeated the phrase, as if it might make more sense the second time. It didn't. The first transport began its descent toward the planet's surface, carrying 2,000 humans toward what every scientific model predicted would be their swift and unpleasant demise. Through the external cameras, Zeph-9 watched the vessel disappear into the acid storm clouds that perpetually shrouded the world below. Betting Pool says they last 6 local days, announced the platform security chief, a massive Cronan whose species measured everything in terms of violent death. I'm taking the under. ZF-9 didn't participate in betting pools. Professional dignity demanded a certain detachment from the fates of deportees. But as he watched the remaining transports follow their predecessor into Kepler 442c's toxic embrace, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong with this entire operation. The humans were still singing. 3 months after the last transport vanished into Kepler 442c's atmospheric blender, senior data analyst Crix-4 noticed something that made her compound eyes dilate with confusion. The monitoring station's long-range sensors had detected electromagnetic signatures from the planet's surface, not the random static of geological activity, but organized patterns that suggested technology. This equipment must be malfunctioning, she announced to the skeleton crew manning the observation post. I'm reading power generation from grid sector 12. Her colleague, a slug-like Morden whose species excelled at pessimistic observations, oozed closer to examine the readings. Impossible. That sector experienced a Category 9 acid storm just last week. Nothing biological could survive those conditions. The signatures are definitely artificial. Crix-4 manipulated the display with her claws, zooming in on the anomalous readings. Multiple sources, distributed across approximately 40 square kilometers. The Mordan's eye stalk swiveled nervously. Perhaps some of the transport wreckage is still generating residual power. For 3 months, through multiple storm cycles, Crix-4 pulled up the historical weather data for the region. This area has experienced temperature swings from -60 to +140 degrees, acid precipitation that could dissolve our hull plating, and predator activity that registers as seismic events. Then the sensors are broken. All 17 of them? The observation post fell silent except for the humming of life support systems and the occasional ping of automated monitoring equipment. Through the reinforced viewing port, Kepler 4442c hung like a malevolent eye, its storm systems churning with the same deadly efficiency they'd maintained for millennia. "Sir?" the communications technician, a young Quillan whose species had evolved specifically to avoid making waves, spoke up hesitantly. "I'm detecting transmissions." Crixhaw's mandibles clicked together in annoyance. "Stellar interference, standard background radiation." "No, sir, these are definitely artificial, and they're coming from the surface." The silence that followed carried the weight of career-ending implications. Crixhaw slowly turned toward the technician, who had gone completely pale despite his fur's natural camouflage capabilities. "Play them." The speakers crackled to life with a burst of static, then resolved into something that defied every scientific model in the hegemony database. Human voices, clear and unmistakably cheerful. "Temperature dropped to -40 last night, but the new shelters held up perfectly. Jenkins thinks we can expand the agricultural domes by another 15% if we reroute the geothermal." The pack behavior is fascinating. They hunt in coordinated groups of 12 to 15 individuals, but they respond to basic conditioning techniques. Thompson's already got 3 of them fetching tools. Acid concentration in Sector 7 tested at 92%, which makes it perfect for the metal purification process. We should have enough refined materials for the next phase by week's end. Crixhaw felt her respiratory systems seize. "Cut the transmission." "There's more, sir. Multiple channels, different frequencies. They appear to have established some sort of communications network." The Morden had gone completely grey, which in his species indicated either extreme terror or digestive distress. "This is a mistake. Humans can't survive Class 0 conditions. It's mathematically impossible." "Tell that to the 47 different active transmissions I'm monitoring," the technician replied, his voice cracking with disbelief. Crixhaw activated the emergency communication array and patched through to Zeph 9's administrative office. The response came almost immediately. "Senior analyst, please tell me you're calling to confirm successful deportation completion." "Sir, we have a problem. The humans they're alive." The pause that followed stretched long enough for stellar drift to become measurable. "Define alive." "Active, organized, expanding their territorial footprint, and apparently domesticating the local predator species." Crixhaw's voice sounded hollow even to her own auditory receptors. "They've established permanent settlements in 7 different biomes." "That's impossible." "They're also broadcasting what appears to be entertainment programming, something called karaoke night and amateur hour comedy show." Another pause, this one accompanied by what sounded like tentacles hitting a desk repeatedly. "Analyst, are you telling me that the humans have turned a Class 0 Deathworld into a recreational facility?" "Sir, based on current data, they appear to be thriving. Energy output suggests population growth rather than decline. They've constructed permanent infrastructure and established agricultural operations using the planet's native flora. The native flora that consumes organic matter, meant to negotiate some sort of arrangement." The communication cut out completely, leaving the observation post in stunned silence. Through the speakers, another human transmission drifted across the void. "Caught the biggest crawler yet today. Things the size of a transport shuttle, but Maria figured out they love having their bellies scratched. We're thinking of starting a breeding program." Crixhaw creaked over and manually disconnected the audio feed. Some revelations were too dangerous to contemplate on an empty stomach. Outside the viewport, Kepler 442c continued its eternal dance of destruction, spinning through space like a perfectly calibrated weapon designed to eliminate any form of life stupid enough to land on its surface. The humans apparently hadn't received that particular memo. Dr. Vex Prime had built her reputation on studying extinction events, not preventing them. which made her current assignment, leading a scientific expedition to investigate the Kepler anomaly, feel like cosmic irony with a side of professional humiliation. Atmospheric entry in 30 minutes, announced the expedition's pilot, a Cronin who treated every flight like a potential death match. Fair warning, the acid concentration down there could dissolve our hull if we stay too long. Noted. Vex Prime checked her instruments one final time, though she suspected they'd prove useless once they encountered whatever impossible physics were keeping 50,000 humans breathing on a world that should have liquefied them months ago. Her research partner, a methodical centrum named Loke E8, ran probability calculations with the obsessive dedication his species was known for. Current survival rates for carbon-based life on Class 0 worlds, 0.003%. Duration of survival, average 4.7 local days. And yet here we are, muttered the expedition's xenobiologist, a sardonic Vorth whose crystalline structure flickered with perpetual skepticism, chasing radio signals from a graveyard. The ship broke through the upper atmosphere, and Vex Prime's breath caught in her throat. Where the orbital surveys had shown barren wasteland punctuated by acid lakes, the landscape below revealed geometric patterns that could only be artificial. Structures, roads, what appeared to be gardens? Are those cultivation fields? Loke's voice carried the tone of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality was undergoing rapid renovation. Impossible, said the Vorth. The soil composition is toxic to all known agricultural systems. Through the viewports, they could see humans moving between buildings with the casual efficiency of people who belonged there. Some were tending what were unmistakably crops, others appeared to be herding creatures that the expedition's database identified as ravager beasts. Apex predators whose documented behavior included consuming anything that moved, breathed, or had the misfortune to remain stationary too long. Landing coordinates received, the pilot announced. They're directing us to what they call a visitor parking area. So they have visitor parking, Vex Prime repeated slowly, on a Deathworld. The ship touched down on a cleared landing pad that showed clear signs of regular maintenance. Through the external cameras they watched a small group of humans approach, waving in what appeared to be a friendly manner. One of them carried a sign that read, "Welcome Scientific Expedition." "They knew we were coming," whispered Locate. "Of course they knew," replied the Vorth, her light pattern cycling through confused amber. "They've probably been monitoring our communications since we entered the system." The expedition donned their environmental suits, radiated for 12 hours of exposure to Class 0 conditions, and activated the airlock. The first human to greet them was a middle-aged woman whose skin showed the kind of healthy tan that suggested regular exposure to sunlight rather than acid precipitation. "Dr. Vex Prime, I assume?" The human extended her hand in what the expedition recognized as a greeting gesture. "I'm Administrator Chen. Welcome to New Eden." Vex Prime stared at the human's exposed hand. "You're not wearing protective gear." "Don't need it. We've adapted." Chen gestured toward the settlement behind her. "Would you like the full tour, or should we start with the agricultural districts? Most visitors are curious about how we manage food production." "Most visitors?" Logate's voice modulator crackled with disbelief. "We've had 3 other expeditions in the past month. The Merchant Guild sent a trade assessment team last week. Lovely people, though they seemed surprised by our export capacity." The Vorth's light patterns shifted to rapid orange, the equivalent of nervous laughter. "Export capacity. Refined metals, primarily. Turns out the acid storms are excellent for purification processes, once you learn to work with them instead of against them." Chen led them toward what appeared to be a thriving town center. We're also developing some interesting biochemical compounds from the local flora. The carnivorous plants produce fascinating enzymes. As they walked, Vex Prime noticed that the humans had somehow turned the planet's deadliest features into tools. Acid runoff was channeled through carefully constructed systems that appeared to power generators. The predatory vegetation had been cultivated into organized groves that seemed to serve as both defensive barriers and resource farms. "The Ravager beasts," said Lock 8, pointing at several of the massive creatures that were lounging in what could only be described as domesticated contentment. "How are they not eating you?" "Oh, they tried at first," Chin replied cheerfully. "But it turns out they're highly social creatures. Once you establish pack hierarchy, they're incredibly loyal. Plus, they're excellent at clearing vegetation for new construction sites." Of a beast, easily the size of a ground transport, rolled over to expose its belly as a human child scratched behind its primary sensory organs. The creature made a sound that resembled purring, if purring could shatter reinforced glass. "This violates every xenobiological principle in our database," whispered the Vorth. "Your database probably doesn't account for human behavioral patterns," Chen said, overhearing. "We tend to approach problems differently than most species." "How so?" asked Vex Prime, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. "Well, when most species encounter a hostile environment, they try to protect themselves from it. We prefer to make friends with it." Chen gestured toward a group of humans who were apparently teaching young Ravager beasts to play fetch with chunks of metallic ore. "Everything's dangerous until you figure out what it wants." The expedition spent the next 4 hours documenting impossibilities. Humans had turned acid storms into manufacturing processes, predatory fauna into livestock, and toxic vegetation into pharmaceutical gardens. They'd established trade relationships with 3 different merchant guilds. As their ship prepared for departure, Vex Prime found herself staring back at the thriving colony that shouldn't exist. "How long before other species start requesting deportation to Deathworlds?" asked Lok E. The Vorth's light patterns shifted to ironic green. "Probably as soon as word gets out that the humans have figured out how to turn Exile into paradise." Through the viewports they could see humans working in their gardens, playing with their impossible pets, and building what appeared to be a concert amphitheater. The scene looked less like a penal colony and more like a vacation resort for the terminally optimistic. Vex Prime activated her recording equipment and began composing her report, though she doubted anyone would believe it. 6 months after the last transport had dumped its human cargo onto what was supposed to be their tomb, diplomatic attaché Nix 12 found herself staring at a formal request that made her question her career choices. The document, transmitted through proper channels with all appropriate seals and signatures, was a trade proposal from the sovereign colony of New Eden, requesting full diplomatic recognition and offering exclusive export agreements for 17 different refined materials. "They want embassy status," she announced to the emergency council session, her voice carrying the flat tone of someone whose worldview had been thoroughly demolished. "They've also submitted terraforming consultation proposals for 12 other worlds." Council Speaker Thanawi, whose species had evolved specifically to avoid surprises, made a sound like grinding metal. "Terraforming consultation. Apparently, they've developed techniques for converting hostile environments into habitable ones using indigenous resources. They're offering their services to any species interested in expanding into previously uninhabitable territories." The council chamber, a sterile dome designed to accommodate 17 different atmospheric requirements, filled with the multilingual equivalent of stunned silence. Through the transparent aluminum walls, space stretched endlessly, offering no answers to questions that shouldn't need asking. Let me understand this correctly, said Councillor Vash-7, a trade specialist whose entire career was built on resource scarcity economics. The humans we exiled to die have established a profitable colony and are now offering to help us settle Deathworlds? That's not the strangest part. Nix-12 activated the holographic display, showing a detailed breakdown of New Eden's current status. They've submitted formal requests to adopt several endangered species from other worlds. They claim their environment would be perfect for rehabilitation. The numbers floating in the display showed population growth, industrial output, agricultural surplus, and what could only be described as recreational facilities. The humans had built museums, sports complexes, and what their documentation described as extreme weather appreciation centers. They turned Exile into tourism, muttered Councillor Jex4, whose crystalline structure flickered with something resembling hysterical laughter. There's more. Nix-12 pulled up the communication logs. We've received formal complaints from the Merchant Guild. Apparently New Eden's export prices are destabilizing several established trade routes. They're producing refined materials at costs that make traditional mining operations uncompetitive. Council Speaker Thano respiratory systems made a sound like escaping gas. They're economically disrupting the sector. Also, 43 different species have submitted petitions requesting their own Deathworld assignments. The waiting list is currently 18 months long. The silence that followed could have been measured in geological time. Several council members appeared to be experiencing what their respective species would consider existential crises. Speaker Thane, came a transmission from the chamber's communication array. We're receiving a priority message from New Eden Colony. They're requesting immediate diplomatic contact. Put them through. The holographic display shifted to show Administrator Chen, though she looked considerably more polished than during the expedition's visit. Behind her, the view showed what appeared to be a thriving city with architecture that somehow incorporated the planet's acid storms as decorative water features. Honorable Council, Chen began, her tone carrying the practiced diplomacy of someone who'd clearly been expecting this conversation. We wanted to personally thank the hegemony for this wonderful opportunity. The challenge has been exactly what our people needed. Challenge, Thaneu repeated weakly. Kepler 442c has provided our community with the perfect environment for innovation and growth. We've developed technologies that we're excited to share with the broader galactic community. Chen gestured toward something off-screen. We're particularly proud of our acid-resistant architecture and our breakthrough in predator domestication techniques. You're thanking us? Of course. This world has allowed us to push the boundaries of what's possible. We've learnt so much about adaptive engineering, ecosystem integration, and sustainable resource management. Chen smiled with the genuine warmth of someone discussing a successful vacation. We'd love to offer similar opportunities to other species. We're calling it the Extreme Environment Colonization Program. Councillor Vash-7's trading instincts finally kicked in. What exactly are you proposing? Partnership. We'll help establish colonies on challenging worlds in exchange for standard diplomatic recognition and trade agreements. Think of it as expanding the definition of habitable space. Chen's image shifted to show detailed schematics and resource projections. We've identified 47 worlds currently classified as unsurvivable that could support thriving communities with the right approach. The council chamber erupted in multilingual chaos as representatives from different species began calculating the economic implications of turning Deathworlds into real estate opportunities. Wait, interrupted Nix-12, raising her voice above the din. Are you telling us that you want to colonize more worlds like Kepler 442c Not exactly like it, Shen replied. Each world presents unique challenges. We're hoping for something even more interesting next time. As the transmission ended and the council dissolved into frantic planning sessions about how to capitalize on humanity's inexplicable talent for thriving in impossible conditions, Nix-12 found herself contemplating the beautiful irony of the situation. The hegemony had intended to teach humanity a lesson about their place in the galactic order. Instead, they'd accidentally discovered that humanity's place was, apparently, wherever they decided to make themselves comfortable, which, as it turned out, included everywhere else. Outside the station's viewports, Kepler 442c hung in space like a malevolent eye that had somehow learned to wink. Somewhere on its surface, 50,000 humans were probably planning their next impossible project, blissfully unaware that they'd just turned the concept of Exile into the galaxy's hottest real estate venture. The punishment had worked perfectly, in exactly the opposite way anyone had intended.